Today's message in book of Exodus, chapter 2, is the message of the life of Moses. Moses spent 40 years thinking he was somebody, and then another 40 years realizing he was nobody, and then another 40 years realizing that he was a nobody that God could use. And that is a great summary of the life of Moses. But in Exodus chapter 2, we're in between those first two periods. Moses has been adopted into Pharaoh's family, and now Moses begins to see, and God begins to work in the life of Moses. Moses was raised in Pharaoh's house, sees the suffering of God's people. In the passage in Exodus chapter 2, verses 13 to 23, he kills an Egyptian in defense of the Hebrew, but is rejected by his own people and flees to Midian, to the wilderness. There he begins a new life as a shepherd. Meanwhile, Israel groans under bondage, and God hears them. And so the key verses in Exodus 2, verses 13 to 23, we have them here. If you can see them. Verse 14, who made you a prince and a judge over us? You remember this is when Moses tried to intervene when the two Hebrews were having a conflict. Verse 15, of course, Moses killed an Egyptian, and Pharaoh hears of this in verse 15, and then his intention is to kill Moses, and Moses flees. And then verse 23, then the children of Israel groaned, and their cry came up to God because of their bondage. And so the three main points that we come from this message are: 1, human rejection doesn't cancel divine calling. Exodus chapter 2, verse 13 and 14, remember the first expression was, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Moses tries to help, but is rejected. And this sounds like failure, but it points forward to Moses' true calling, which was to come much later on in his life. But God himself would make Moses that very thing, a prince and a judge over his people. Acts chapter 7, verse 35, Stephen says, this Moses whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge, is the one God sent to be a ruler and a deliverer. And I suppose the takeaway for us as believers in Jesus Christ is that people may reject you now, but God's calling stands. Your identity and purpose come from Him, not from public opinion. Secondly, wilderness seasons are God's classrooms. Interesting that the characters that God used in the wilderness, the Apostle Paul was the same. If you read Galatians chapter 1, we read there he was in the wilderness and then God spoke to him. And in this case, in the life of Moses, Moses flees to Midian. He lives in obscurity and becomes a shepherd. God used the wilderness to shape Moses into a humble and faithful leader. And there he spent 40 years before he was called back. Here we see that the delay wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Here the takeaway is that God often hides us to refine us. The wilderness may feel like delay, but it is divine development. 1 Peter 5, verse 6, therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Psalm 25, verse 9, the humble he guides in justice, and the humble he teaches his way. And then the third main point is God sees, hears, and remembers. Israel cried out under slavery, and God responds. Exodus chapter 2, God heard, God remembered, God looked, and God acknowledged them. And maybe this is the verse that will encourage you. Maybe you're in difficult circumstances, but let's remember God hears, God remembers, God looks, and God acknowledges. Psalm 34, verse 7, the righteous cry out, and the Lord hears and delivers them out of all their troubles. You remember Joseph's dying words, Genesis chapter 50, verse 24. God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land. Exodus 2 shows the beginning of that fulfillment. Even in silence and suffering, God is not absent. He hears, remembers, and He moves in perfect timing. Maybe you're in a season of waiting, confusion, or wilderness. Moses was too. But God was writing a bigger story than Moses ever imagined. Trust in God's timing. He is preparing and working behind the scenes to fulfill His promises. Isaiah 55 verse 8 and 9, my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. Thank you for listening.